Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar, Steps to Success with Self-Service Analytics. Let's go ahead and get started. So with us today is author and noted analyst Wayne Eckerson. Wayne is a familiar name to many in the business intelligence field, and today he's here to share his thoughts about self-service analytics. Since the 1990s, Wayne has written many BI books, been a featured speaker at numerous conferences, and is the principal consultant of the Eckerson Group that has recently published a report titled A Reference Architecture for Self-Service Analytics, which is part of our discussion today. Wayne, thank you very much for joining our webinar. We are also joined by Troy Marchand. As co-founder of Dundas, Troy brings over 30 years of software development and leadership experience to our team. In previous roles, including chief architect, he's developed many successful award-winning software programs. Today, as president and CEO, Troy combines his data visualization and business intelligence expertise, along with his passion for solving customer problems, to the overall leadership of the Dundas vision. And as well, we have myself, Vlad Katkov. I'm a solution architect here at Dundas. So the agenda for today, we'll be discussing that report put out by Wayne's group, A Reference Architecture for Self-Service Analytics, and discuss some of the key report findings. Then we're going to have a Q&A session with Wayne and Troy in order to discuss how to succeed with self-service analytics. That will be followed by a live demo of the Dundas BI platform by myself, how self-service analytics actually work in the application, and then we have a Q&A session at the end. At any point in the webinar, please feel free to type in questions using the GoToWebinar questions panel, and someone will address them. All right, Wayne, it's over to you.
Great. Thanks, Vlad. It certainly is an honor to be a participant in this webcast hosted by Dundas and to engage in a discussion with Troy Marchand, CEO of Dundas, who I've known for many years, and I look forward to that. Self-service analytics is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've been thinking about it, writing about it, researching and speaking about it for probably 20 years or more. And what I've discovered is that it's the holy grail of BI in analytics. It makes a lot of sense. Users or business users get what they want, when they want, how they want it, without having to ask IT or someone else for help or assistance and then wait and wait and wait. And conversely, IT gets all these requests for custom reports off of their back so they can focus on architectural and other issues. So it seems like the proverbial win-win situation, but what I've discovered is that self-service BI and analytics is actually very tricky. And it's a heck of a lot harder than it looks to pull off and make it work properly. What I've seen over the years with many organizations that have implemented self-service BI or analytics is that they create a flood of reports. Some users get their hands on these self-service tools and go to town. They create dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of reports, many of which are duplicates, variations on the same theme. Of course, this inundation makes it hard for regular users to find the proper report to use. But what's worse is that a lot of these reports don't add up. They contain inconsistent, conflicting data, which confuses users even more, to the point where they don't trust any of the reports and they go back to IT to get custom requests fulfilled. And conversely, the power users who are using these tools to create reports, they don't trust anyone else's report except their own, because only they know how they've created and concocted their data and metrics. So it does create a kind of proverbial architectural mess. As well, there are, it also promulgates, lots of shadow reporting systems that are managed by one or two power users outside of IT. This increases overhead overall for BI in the organization, which increases costs. And something a lot of people don't think about, it increases risks. If that one or two people who are supporting the business unit or department with custom reports leaves, that department is left in the dark potentially. So it really creates an architectural implosion. And self-service without standards or governance really is a Tower of Babel. A lot of people spewing out a lot of information, but very little communication going on. So although there's a lot of promise to self-service analytics and BI, there's a lot of peril I have found in my experience. Ultimately, self-service comes down to this kind of universal tension between opposites, the opposites of freedom and control. And those exist within any business environment, and indeed within our own lives and society as a whole. In the business world, more specifically the BI world, well, I'm jumping ahead. So, freedom would be represented by self-service, the ability to get the data you want, when you want it, how you want it. Control represented by this notion of governance that usually comes from IT or the CXO about how we're going to do things, and we'll do it in a standardized way for the benefit of the entire organization. In the BI realm, we see this tension between freedom and control exhibited in the tension between business units and corporate parent, between the need for speed in the business units versus the need for standards for the organization as a whole, the need for agility to meet customer needs rapidly, and the need for architecture to do things in a standard way to create economies of scale. Ultimately, it's the tension between business and IT. If we go too far in any one direction, we create all kinds of problems, and I've alluded to those already. Too much self-service can create data silos and the Tower of Babel. Conversely, too much governance is what a lot of self-service people are rebelling against. It creates backlogs, which in turn create shadow IT. So the question is, what do we do about this? How do we balance freedom and control? We can't have one or the other. It's not an either-or situation. If it is, we run into one of these problems, data silos or backlogs. What we need is a both-and situation. We need ways to balance these dual, and I would say dueling forces. Ultimately, what we need is not self-service, we need governed self-service. So the irony of self-service is that it requires a lot of standardization, and that's really another way of saying that what we need is not self-service, but governed self-service. Let's put in place the standards architecturally, from a process and workflow perspective, and once we have those standards in place, then we can give users all kinds of freedom to do what they need to do from an information perspective. So the report that we just published at Eckerson Group that I had a big hand in writing was all about how do you deliver governed self-service. And the report was titled A Reference Architecture for Self-Service Analytics. So we presented what we think is the ideal architecture for supporting self-service, recognizing that in very few organizations is the ideal ever achieved, but nonetheless we need a goal to shoot for. Underlying the reference architecture is a number of success factors, and these involve what you see here on the screen. To really succeed with self-service and analytics in general, you need the right people, the right processes, the right tools, the right architecture, the right organization, and the right training. So the report we wrote touches on all of these, but focus most on the architecture, laying the data and analytical foundation for self-service analytics. Now, my mission here in this webcast is to, kind of introduce this notion in 10 minutes or so. So I can't touch on all the nuances of these bullets, but I will give you some high-level thoughts and show you common workflows that I think should be in place to support self-service analytics, and give you a picture of the reference architecture itself. And once I do that, then we'll have a discussion. So this describes or depicts what I think are self-service workflows in an ideal environment that's supporting governed self-service. There's actually 3 sets of workflows here. One, there's a left to right workflow, the curate to create to consume workflow. There's also a right-to-left workflow or a back-channel workflow that's propose, prototype, and promote. And then within each step, which is represented by a different type of user, the IT department, the power user, the casual user, there are bidirectional iterative workflows that are going on. Now, in the old days, the IT department was responsible for curating and creating everything that all users, both power users and casual users, consumed. But in the age of self-service, with new self-service tools from companies such as Dundas, power users can take a much bigger role in this workflow. As you can see here, they can front and center do a lot of the creation, offloading a lot of that from the IT department. They can also participate to some degree in the curation process, as well as consuming the output that they create or others. So this is a big change in that IT doesn't have to do everything. The problem is you don't want power users to go off on their own without IT and just willy-nilly create whatever they want. So this back channel, or the right-to-left workflows, show how power users can ideally contribute. They are going to use the triumvirate of tools out there today, and I call that triumvirate the visual discovery tools, data prep tools, and data cataloging tools, to go out and find new sources of data, derive insights, and then share them through dashboards or visualizations. They can certainly consume those for themselves and maybe their colleagues in their work group. But if they want to share that result set, that visualization more broadly, and extend what the IT department is offering from a governed perspective, they can prototype that and promote it to the IT department to go through a promotion process that validates the new visualization, the metrics in it, the dimensions in it, how they were calculated, what data sources they are coming from, and align it with what's already out there. So what's new doesn't break what's old. Rather, it extends it, hopefully in an agile, nimble way. And in the report, we talk about examples of how that is done. This slide shows the reference architecture. It's a rather busy slide. In the middle, with the boxes, you see what I call an information supply chain. This is not too different from the data warehousing supply chain or the data lake supply chain, but certainly has some differences. One, that we land and persist all the data in our environment, which we can do more cost effectively these days with Hadoop. Second, we don't try to model everything from a business perspective in the corporate environment, in the data hub. Rather, we just model the largest subject areas like customers and orders, and then make that data available for downstream consumption. And the business units, the business users, are then responsible for creating business-specific views on top of that integrated data. Now, the purpose of this reference architecture is to align or map business users to the information supply chain, as well as technology to the supply chain, and developers to the supply chain, which you can see here. There, at the bottom, there are 4 main roles: data consumer, data explorer, data analyst, data scientist, which is part and parcel of data statistician. There are some differences there, but I won't go into them now. And this shows where each of these types of users accesses information in the supply chain. So the real key to self-service is to give users exactly what they need, but no more than they need. And that requires knowing who your users are and classifying them. And when I consult with organizations, that's the first thing I ask. And I'm always surprised that very few have gone out and identified, for one, and then classified all the users in the organization who do anything related to BI and what they're doing and how they're doing it. I think that's really the first step in self-service success, is understanding your users and then mapping them to the right data flows and the right tools and the right applications. One other thing I'll point out here is the shading, which, as I look at this, is not the prettiest shading in the world, but I'm not a graphic designer. But you'll see there's a pink shading to the right, it's silver service. There's blue shading called self-service, and then there's the gray shading to the left called operations. The silver service, to me, is not self-service. And I think a lot of people out there talk about self-service when they really should be talking about silver service. Silver service is for individuals who want access to information but don't want to work too hard for it. They really want data served up on a silver platter, hence the word silver service. In other words, they want reports and dashboards and data sets that are tailored to their specific roles and needs. In other words, pre-digested, predefined by someone else who knows what they need in advance and provides it to them. So certainly data consumers, which represent the majority of people in your organization, are in that silver service camp, where they're using information really in a tactical way for the most part to run the business. Give me a quick glance at my key metrics and KPIs that I need to run my part of the business, and I'm off and running. I know exactly what I need to do for the day. Data analysts and data scientists are squarely in the self-service camp, which is, we need unfettered access to information wherever it lies in the organization, and the ability to pull that data together in any shape, form that we want to answer questions that business people have that our current set of reports and dashboards can't answer because we didn't know what the requirements were when we built those. So this is true ad hoc environment that every organization needs. It's not a bad thing, but as I said earlier, unless it's managed and architected up front, it can consume your organization and create chaos. Now, the real challenge I have found is how to service the needs of the data explorers. Those are the 30% of people, largely casual users, typically managers, product managers, who will consume the standard dashboards, but often want to go a step or two further some of the time. So some of the time, maybe 20% of the time, they do want true ad hoc access to information, but they don't want it to be too hard. They'd rather start with what you're giving them and be able to edit it. So that editing function, be able to modify what's already there, take an existing report or dashboard and extend it, either by opening the data model, creating new metrics, adding new dimensions, or even adding some local data, spreadsheet data, or even external data like weather data or demographic data. It's something that a data explorer wants to do, and they're the toughest ones I find to support. They kind of fall right between self-service and silver service, but most of the time they're in the silver service camp, and I do believe that if you manage and design your BI environment properly, their need for self-service goes down. And I like to say, and it's a little, the goal of BI isn't to maximize self-service, it's to minimize the need for it. My environment is, and the better you, as BI professionals, can anticipate business users, the less they will need to do ad hoc. If you look at it, it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, and sometimes gives you the wrong answer. But nonetheless, there certainly is a need for ad hoc. It will always be there, and that's how we change the business, by going after new insights and new information. So anyway, that's a very quick synopsis of the reference architecture. For more details, you can download the report, which is on Dundas's website in the resource section, I believe, or you can go to the Eckerson Group website and download it there. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Vlad, and we can start our discussion between me and Troy.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Wayne. This is Troy Marchand speaking right now. That was really good information there. So one of the things I'd like to ask you, because we're on the side where we're dealing with a lot of people trying to implement self-serve, they're coming in for the first time, and what would you say to them, where they really want the self-serve side, but what you showed with the reference architecture is so far off where they are today. How would they get going? Like, would you take a phased approach? Is that a possible way of doing it? Is it an all or nothing? So how would you kind of position it to the people that do feel that reference architecture is something that's very far off? How would we get them going today?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And no one has implemented the reference architecture. Most people are kind of behind the 8-ball. You know, ideally, you get out in front of this self-service wave, which has, you know, kind of washed over us in the past 5 years or so with the advent of these new visual discovery tools and new data prep tools. And it's best for you to bring these tools in an architected way rather than have the business users bring them in an unarchitected way. So, you know, if you can bring them in and point them to your data warehouse for shared data across business units and give them the option to go after any other data for non-shared data, that's ideal. You know, if that's not the case and you're completely behind the 8-ball, you know, it's a lot of work. It takes a long time to really get the confidence of the business, establish the relationships, and be ready once they hit the wall, because eventually the business is going to hit the wall with too much self-service. Too much freedom creates chaos, and chaos creates a lot of wastage and loss economically. And eventually there's going to be a business leader, hopefully higher up the better, who's going to understand the need for governance and ideally the need for governed self-service, and is going to want to work with you to start to establish some standards for how information should get disseminated in an organization, and, you know, establish controls over who gets access to what information and what functionality in the BI tool. So I always tell people you have to be ready, even though it seems like a tough slog and business is against you, because right now we're in this era where the pendulum has swung away from IT and into the business, which has all the money and all the influence, and they can go out and buy these new fancy tools and hire their own people, and that's great. It gives them all the agility and speed they want, but eventually the pendulum will swing back because they'll just have too much overhead, too much risk, and they'll likely be getting wrong answers if they don't have the right skills in place. So you need to be ready with a plan. You need to start building things up from the bottom up and show how this can work. So that's not really perhaps an answer that is an easy one. There's not a quick fix to it, but that's all I can offer at this point.
Yeah, no, and that's great. So what I notice, you know, throughout the whole thing, especially when we've got a lot of clients that are looking to do self-serve, they look at it as a business-only thing. I don't need to get IT involved, but I really think it's, you know, quite a bit, you know, more of that partnership between IT and the business side getting together to build a system like this. And I'm sure you'd probably see the same thing, Wayne, where a lot of people look at it as, well, business can get it going on their own, but I think it really does require that true partnership where IT is about getting in there, making sure the infrastructure is set up. And I really like your way of looking at the difference between self-serve and silver service. And I can absolutely say most of our clients, when they come in and say they want self-serve, really what they're looking for is silver service. But I think the challenge is, and let's see if, you know, when you're working with clients, you have the same type of challenge, is they assume there's not too much setup to this. It's something business can do on their own without the need for IT. So when you're working with a lot of people, Wayne, do you see the same type of situation where they think it's something that can be set up without getting IT involved?
Absolutely, and there's a lot of vendors out there who kind of take advantage of that. We won't name names, but some of the leaders out there have this land and expand philosophy of sales, and it has been designated to circumvent IT, and they've been very successful. But ultimately, you know, the chicken comes home to roost, and we're seeing that a lot of these land and expand environments are just completely chaotic and a complete mess, and that ultimately makes a vendor look bad. So we're starting to see the pendulum swing back where these vendors are starting to move away a little bit from their land and expand approach and start to bring in IT into the discussion up front. And ultimately it's in the vendor's interest as well. If they want to do enterprise deals, they have to go through IT, because IT is going to be the one who manages enterprise resources and enterprise deployment. So things are starting to change in that direction. And I'm curious, from your perspective, obviously, you at Dundas, you sell software into companies, and I'm wondering what you're seeing, as the ideal approach to bring business and IT together to deliver an environment that's going to work in the long run.
Yeah, so for us, if we don't have that partnership between business and IT with our clients, I can say we're not doing our clients any service. So the deals that go the best where our clients feel they're getting the most value are the ones that really feel that IT should be part of the process. So we work really heavily on both sides, making sure business users understand the setup required so they can have that freedom once it's set up. And it also offloads IT over time. So IT usually gets bought in. They understand that they have to invest more at the beginning, but then over time they're going to have less business people coming back to them because now the business people can serve themselves a bit better. So it really is those companies that understand it's working together as a team, they're on the same side, versus I've seen some organizations look at business versus IT. And when we work with companies that think more that way, I'd say we have much less success in helping them build something that they feel has good value. Where the ones that are coming in, business and IT, are coming in together, working as partners on this, we can see a ton of success. And it really is that type of a partnership that will make it work. And they kind of get what they want at the end of the day, because business people say one of the reasons they're looking for self-serve is IT ends up being a bottleneck. But if IT does all that prep up front, they don't have to be involved in making a tweak to the next report. All the systems are in place in such a way that it gives them that freedom. But it really requires that upfront work where they are going together. So yeah, absolutely what you're saying is what we see. And if we only sell straight into the business side because they want self-service, I would say we do our best to avoid that, or our best to convince them to get IT involved as early as possible. That would be where we find the most success, and that's our approach working with our clients today.
Yeah, it's interesting that Dundas has been around quite a while. I don't think many people know that. You started out selling visualization components, and then you moved into the dashboarding space, and now it's your latest release. You're providing a full-fledged BI environment. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've seen the BI marketplace expand and how that's precipitated some of these changes that you've gone through at Dundas.
Sure. So I would say from a lot of other people in the space, we've probably come from a very different approach. We didn't come into this more as data scientists. We came in more on the technology side, working with software developers and IT staff, and versus looking at from the business side first, where I say a lot of vendors, that's where they started. So then as we spent time working with the development, the whole goal is to help IT staff empower their business users, and that's the background we came from. And we noticed a lot of the time, the on the IT side, over time they were kind of saying, well, the business users are getting frustrated because things take so long, they want to have more power. So we really focused, as I said, helping the technical side deliver better value to the business, and that's kind of where we, as I said, where we came from. So we moved quickly into the data visualization space in the mid-90s. And that was our big focus, is really helping around that. And at that time, the term, business intelligence wasn't really used, or at least it wasn't common. But at the end of the day, our whole focus as a company was really helping the IT side, because they actually had the frustration with the business side. They actually felt that they weren't able to deliver enough. Business was always asking for more. So they were looking for ways of being able to actually empower business in a lot of cases. And where business side thinks, in some cases, IT is a bottleneck. So it was a really interesting kind of point of view because we didn't take it from just the business side's standpoint. We started, as I said, more on the technical side, which has really influenced how we approach a lot of our development and the way we design our products. So the big thing that you mentioned before is making sure you set up everything in such a way that people can get that silver service, but at the same time have that flexibility to have that self-serve. And that's kind of where we kind of came from. We took the approach of we don't know what the business users are going to need, what they're going to ask for the next day. So we always looked at flexibility as being a key approach. Working tightly with IT has always been the key way that we've worked with their business users. As I said, we never came from it as a pure business play only. We've always came at looking at data as a technology that helps business versus just business people getting access to numbers. We look at it as a merger of those two. So that could be why we approach things so differently.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll turn it back to Vlad to give a demo. I wonder, and I confront this a lot with clients, you know, a lot of the executives, they want one tool to support all BI needs and all business users. And I know it's where a lot of vendors are trying to go, is to be that one-all, everything type of tool to support any kind of need. But do you think that's realistic? Do you think that companies are going to need to have multiple tools and platforms to support the full range of their analytical needs?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you an interesting answer. I'm going to say yes and no. So I think what people want is everything to work out of the box the way that they want it. And I've been in the business long enough to say there's no way to get something that one particular person wants out of the box just works their particular way, because everyone's got different ways of doing things. So that means if you're trying to solve all the needs, you start getting a product that's way too cluttered. Where you need to take more of an approach of you take the common things that people want, you can get that working out of the box, but then you have to design your platform to be flexible enough so you can have those differences between one company and the next company and the different needs that they do have. So I get the idea that if they have too many products, you know, it becomes harder to maintain. They have to learn different things, so it increases your training, increases your costs, you're dealing with different vendors. So we took the approach of realizing we can't do everything out of the box, but how do we give people that single kind of experience? And so again, we took our experience of building things that are very customizable for software developers in our early days in the 90s and took that kind of philosophy to BI, where we said literally, you know, let's build a product that solves 80% of the problems out of the box, and let's make that 20% doable. But it does require customization. Again, that's why I was saying you need that partnership between IT and business, where IT can make those tweaks to give exactly what the business users need. But I do think, you know, trying to get that everything works out of the box, you don't need IT involved, it just goes, that's, you know, in some ways I call it, you know, you're trying to hunt for a unicorn. You're never going to find it. So it's a good thing to try to strive for, and you know, as a company we try to strive to get there, but it's almost that unrealistic goal at the end of the day. So we do our best to get there, but we also realize, you know, there are ways to achieve it, but as I said, maybe just not out of the box. We can achieve it by working, as I said, IT and business together a lot more. So, but I'd say it's a good goal.
You know, it is interesting that markets kind of swing back and forth to what part or what types of users they support. You know, the last 5 years, since 2010, really, with the advent of big data and the growth of visual discovery, the market's been hyper-focused on 10% of the audience, you know, the data scientists and the data analysts who really do need, you know, unfettered ad hoc self-service. And they're kind of forgetting about, first of all, the 60% that a tool like Dundas supports really well with, you know, pixel-perfect dashboards, interactive dashboards. And then I think the real battleground is that data explorer, that remaining 30% who, for the most part, want standard reports and dashboards, but often want to go a step further. What kind of tools, what kind of environment that they can support that is best for them? I think that's still undecided yet. And in the report, I had a little section on the conundrum of the data explorer. What do we do about these? Do they need self-service or silver service? And I kept waffling back and forth whether to put them entirely in the silver service camp or the self-service camp. The vendors would all say, they're self-service. But ideally, those are managers. They're not getting paid to do analysis. They don't want to spend nights and weekends, sifting through data and creating reports. They really want that, done for them. They want, ideally, and they want it push button easy to modify and customize it to meet their needs. So to me, if we've got a really strong BI environment, it's meeting 90% of your users' needs 100% of the time or close to it. But anyway, we're running a little short of time, so maybe it's a good point in the discussion to turn it over to Vlad and actually see some of this in operation.
Okay, great. And thanks very much, Wayne, for doing the first part of the presentation. So Vlad, over to you.
Sounds good. Wayne and Troy, thank you both very much. That's a very interesting and engaging discussion. We have a number of questions actually to ask for our Q&A session after the demo. For the time being, let's go ahead and explore what self-service, not just self-service, but governed self-service analytics looks like in Dundas BI. So what everyone should be seeing right now is the Dundas BI logon page. And I'll take you through the application in order to see the different features that we offer in order to try and make your BI deployment successful. So I'm going to start by logging in as a sales analyst. And for the duration of the demo, I'll be using this account. So just a quick overview for those not very familiar. Dundas BI is a web-based application. It covers all of your BI needs on top of basically any data source. It combines the best of both traditional and modern BI tools by allowing data preparation, analytics, custom presentation, and collaboration, all within our extensible platform that's built entirely upon open APIs and the latest web standards. So what's interesting is Dundas BI is designed to scale to all the different user types within your organization, and this will of course range from a casual user who generally wants to consume reports and dashboards, to power users such as business analysts and data scientists, all the way up to developers such as system analysts and data engineers. So what we're looking at here is the default homepage when a user logs into Dundas BI. In the center, we see some tiles that are essentially shortcuts to different parts of the application, which allow me to create dashboard scorecards, perform analysis, create KPIs, and also manipulate data. So right now, I'm logged in as a developer user, which is why I see options such as connecting to data and creating data models. Now, these tiles do adapt based on the type of user that's logged in order to better cater to their skills and role. So let's consider a top-down approach to this demonstration and begin by doing what a typical data consumer would do. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, I have several links to recently viewed dashboards. Let's go ahead and open up one of them. So what we're looking at here is a finished dashboard that a power or developer user would have created in the application and then made available for other users to view and interact with. We have a very managed end user experience which will fall in line with the abilities of most data consumers. So I believe this kind of falls into the category of the silver service that Wayne was talking about. For instance, here you'll see I have a filter that lets me change the date range of my data. We've also added a checkbox that I can use to either show or hide a specific measure on the visual, as well as a button which will actually bring up a view of the details that are powering this visualization. Lastly, you'll notice there's a drop-down here that will allow me to re-visualize the visualization over here. And this is interesting because I can go, let's say, from a view right now which shows me my month-by-month data to perhaps an area chart, which now lets me interpret the trend of the information. So I do want to point out that this ability to revisualize is in fact present in the application by right-clicking on any visual and selecting Revisualize from the menu. However, you will notice that in my right-click context menu, I have a lot of other options. For example, the ability to sort, filter my data, change the level at which it's displayed at. Now, some users simply might not need so many options and would, in fact, prefer an easier menu with a limited number of choices, very much like this drop-down over here. So Dundas BI does have this level of flexibility. It's up to the creators of the dashboard to decide how interactive it should be, as well as the system administrators to specify what privileges each user should have. So now let's navigate using my top navigation over here to the sales dashboard, which might have some more information that our sales analyst is interested in viewing. So similar to the previous dashboard, there's a lot of interactivity built in for the end user. I also have a breakdown that I can bring up of my sales information and actually filter by some of my employees over here. So for instance, I can select all of them and display my data like this. Now what's interesting is I also have the ability to create a filter selection and save it as what we call a token. So for instance, from my token menu, I can bring up only the users that are part of my North American sales team. This just makes it easier for me to make a selection and remember it to bring it up very quickly for use in the future. So to summarize, even the casual user has a lot of self-service capabilities in the platform, such as the token creation, and they are matched to the person's skill level and needs. Now let's take it a step further, and perhaps I'd like to make some changes to this dashboard and personalize it just a little bit in order to display a different data set. Now this behavior may be indicative of a data explorer. This is something that Wayne was mentioning. This is a casual user who is primarily a consumer but may want to edit or modify a report slightly just to better suit their needs. So in our toolbar, there is an option that's called Edit Copy for Analysis. When I click on this, this will create a copy of the dashboard that I can now bring up and edit in my private sandbox environment. So what exactly do I mean by private environment? Well, using my left navigation menu, I can bring up a list of all the projects that my user currently has access to. Projects in Dundas BI are very similar to folders on a regular computer system. They're here to separate unrelated work efforts. Every user has their own My Project, which is this private environment, and it's a great place for users to test and prepare their data without actually cluttering up the environment with half-finished dashboards and reports. So I'll begin making changes to this by first modifying my revenue by sales versus targets chart. Let's say I want to add a little bit more context to this, and perhaps I want to include what we call period over period. What this will do, this will let me view my sales data compared to the previous year. So I click that, it brings up my window. I simply have to select the measure I'm interested in making this comparison again. So let's select revenue. And my offset is automatically set to go back by 1 year, which is exactly what I want to display right now. So I can go ahead, apply this change, and you'll notice a new series shows up on the chart. So now I'm displaying these values side by side. It makes it a lot easier for me to figure out how my performance was compared to the previous year. Now let's do a bit more. Perhaps I'd like to add in a simple formula to display the average of all my sales. Once again, from the Data Tools menu bar, I have the option to drop in a formula. Now let's go ahead and I can start typing average to find the average formula. I simply need to click on the measure I'm interested in creating this formula for, and then I can specify how I'd like it to show up on the chart. And perhaps I want it to display as a line going across my data imposed on top of it. There we go. You can see the line has been applied, and now it is going across my chart. So it's very easy, and it's a quick way to perform analysis. This is a very similar method to what a lot of users currently use in programs such as Excel, except we are able to present this in a visual format. Let's go ahead and continue some modifications. Perhaps we take a look at the bottom left of the dashboard. I have a pie chart, which is my revenue by product. Maybe I'm not so so happy with this visualization. Perhaps I'd like to replace it with something else. So I can simply delete it. And on the right side of my screen, I can use my library of metrics to see a list of pre-built visuals that I already have access to. So these are visuals that other users, perhaps a data engineer, has created in the application and made available for me to use. I can also simply use the search bar to find a specific metric I'd like to display. Here we go, my product relationship sales. I now just drag it out onto my dashboard, and I can position it to replace the previous pie chart like so. All right, so now my changes have been made, and we could keep going, but let's say for the time being we're done. Once I view my dashboard, it is interactive the same way it was before, with all my filters and drill ups and drill downs. Now this is great, the fact that I've been able to actually make my changes very quickly to the dashboard, but do keep in mind this is currently only available to my user because it's in my private repository. I may, however, want to share my work with other users. So Dundas BI does have a share menu option in the toolbar where, first of all, I can export the dashboard to a common format such as image, PDF, Excel, PowerPoint. However, I can also click on link in order to generate a link that I can send over to other users, and they'll be able to view and interact with the dashboard. I can also, very easy for me to use this container to just click on the users that should have access to this. I was explaining how we've covered the data consumer and explorer, and that now we perhaps want to move into the shoes of a data analyst. So the analyst is someone who understands the data from a business perspective, but also has the need to create the visuals and KPIs. So from my home screen, I will click on the Explore Data tile in order to navigate to Dundas BI's data analysis window, where I can really focus on creating a particular metric using a set of business requirements. So on this page, I can actually connect to a new data source using some of these shortcuts. I can also drag and drop a flat file such as Excel directly onto the screen, but what I'll do is I'll use an existing data structure that I've already connected to in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and select one of my SQL tables, databases, open that up to see all my tables, select one of those, and expand in order to see all the columns. And you'll notice that Dundas BI will actually automatically recognize some of these columns as measures and dimensions. Let me go ahead and select my total due measure, which is the value of all the sales. So now, right now, it's displayed in one aggregated value. Perhaps I'd like to break it down by the modified date. So now I've included this value in my visualization, and my data is grouped like so. Now you'll notice the date time. The date is in a raw date time format. So in Dundas BI, it's very easy to apply what we call a time dimension, which will now allow me to display my data in different levels. So right now it's grouped at the year level. If I right-click, we once again see the context menu that I've shown earlier, and I can change the level to go from year to month. And so now I have my data like this. Another very common thing for a data analyst to do is to combine multiple data sources together. And in Dundas BI, we can do a lot of this work on the fly. So for instance, from my data connectors panel, I can go ahead and open up an Excel file that I have created. And all I need to do is I can take one of the columns I'm interested in displaying, drag it out onto my visual, and Dundas BI behind the scenes is actually joining this data together. And even though I have some data from Excel and some from SQL, we can very simply display that data together in one visual. And so now that I've joined my data a little bit, manipulated it, it's a perfect opportunity to go ahead and revisualize to perhaps a stacked bar, which will let me see my performance over the years, but as well as my different credit card types. So it's important to understand that when I dragged in my Excel data, Dundas BI automatically prepared the data model for me behind the scenes. The small data model that I created can actually be viewed and saved so that other users will have access to it. And this is typically where a data engineer plays a role. And in Dundas BI, the data engineer can actually leverage the work that the Data Explorer has already completed. So first, let's just give this metric set a name. So perhaps this is called Total Due Trend by Credit Card. Now this visualization is saved, and I can find it in my metric sets folder in my Explore panel. If I expand that, I see the source cube that's actually powering this visualization. And by right-clicking on it, I'm able to promote it and make it its own standalone model. So once again, let's give this a name, Total Due by Credit Card. And now what I can do is from the Data Cubes folder, open up my model and see what Dundas BI did. So here you can see we have our SQL table, our Excel data joined together by this transform. So the data cube, our data cubes are quite powerful. They're able to manipulate the data quite a bit. As an example, perhaps I'm interested in converting some of the data that is coming from my SQL database. We can insert what we call a transform, and you'll see there are a lot of transforms that ship with the product out of the box. For instance, a data conversion, which I can then configure to have the appropriate data types. Now we can continue talking about the data cube for quite a long time, but let's say that we're done for the time being and move on. So the data engineer, when I set up a model to be used by many users, I may need to introduce governance in the form of data security. So in Dundas BI, we can accomplish this with what's called a custom attribute, which can automatically filter the data based on the user that is logged into the system. So to display custom attributes, what I'll do is I'll log out as the sales analyst, and I will log in actually using my Windows credentials. So my Windows account user is an administrator in the application. So as a result, I have access to this admin section. Now to briefly introduce this, this is where your administrator can completely govern the entire application, change the product, the files, affect the accounts, also apply licenses, and configure the application, all the little ins and outs for performance and other options. This is all available online. There's no other application to install. Now what I'll do is I'll access my accounts, and I'm going to select this consumer user that I've created here. And by editing this user, I'm able to change this custom attribute, which will then end up filtering their data. So as you can see over here, the sales territory has been added to the user. I can simply edit this, and I have to select a data model that the data engineer would have set up ahead of time. So here is my sales territory data model, and then using this drop-down, it's very easy for me to choose what this person should view. So perhaps my consumer is part of the North American team. I'm going to check off Canada and all the regions that we have in the United States, and now apply this change. So let's go ahead and see what this actually does. I'm going to log out of the system and log on as my consumer. This is going to take us to a dashboard that I've created. And what we're displaying here on the left side is a visual that has all my raw data. All the rows are being retrieved. There is no filtering being applied to this. On the right side is that very same visual, except the data is filtered only by the selection that we just made when logged in as the administrator user. So this is simply one example of governance that can be applied in Dundas BI. We can also affect security permissions, user privileges, data access level, and much, much more. But hopefully, this is a quick introduction to the concept within the application. And so with that, that actually brings our demo portion to a close. What we can do now is open it up for a Q&A session. And if I can actually start, we did have some very good questions that came from our webinar attendees. So Wayne, I believe this first one is directed to you. Someone asked, in your opinion, does a data analyst fall into the category of IT, or is that someone who's a business user?
Yeah, good question. The title analyst is the most abused title in the lexicon of the English dictionary, I think. So they're analysts in IT, obviously, but when I say data analyst, I'm referring to a business user, typically an Excel jockey, MBA graduate, product manager in the making, right out of college or graduate school. So a data analyst, someone's hired to, use spreadsheets and answer ad hoc questions from business unit heads.
Yep.
I used to call them business analysts until a lot of BI people refer to business analysts as the requirements folks. So anyway.
Yeah, for sure. It's an interesting question. Another one that was asked by a webinar attendee, once again, directed to you, in your opinion, which department should come up with the business requirements document for the deployment of the BI application? Should it be the IT side or the business unit that will be using it?
Well, that is a great question, and how IT or BI engages with the business is a $60 million question, and there's a lot of different approaches to it. I will say the closer you are to the business and the fewer people you have translating between business and developers, the better off you're going to be. And the more strategic those conversations are versus tactical, the better off you're going to be. So I'm a little bit radical in this perspective. I don't think traditional requirements gathering works well in BI. I prefer to have senior level relationship managers engaged with the business, either coming from the business, whose job it is to consolidate, to solicit, and proactively, even before the business requests requirements, generate requirements for solutions to their problems. The last thing BI or IT needs to be is an order taker. If you're an order taker, you've lost the battle. You need to be a strategic partner, and the only way to do that is to be side by side with the business, co-located with the business, working on strategic problems so that you can anticipate requirements instead of taking orders. So that may not be a direct answer to the question, but in my experience, from what I have seen succeed, those organizations that are partnering with the business, they're the ones who are really succeeding with BI.
Okay. All right, thanks. Thanks, Wayne. That's a very good explanation. One more that we have here. How do you help clients understand upfront the hazards or risks of having too much freedom?
That is a great question. Oftentimes, they don't know the perils and the risks until it hits them between the eyes. And you can see the train wreck coming, but they can't. And sometimes you just have to wait for it to happen. And sometimes you have to wait for a change in leadership. And you have to be ready. When it does happen, when the opportunity makes itself available, you have to be ready to strike with the solution. I've talked to many folks who've labored for years kind of in the weeds, just establishing relationships with the business. And then things happen in the organization. There's a new CEO, there's a new strategy, there's a new M&A, and the business is ripe to do things differently from a data perspective. And if you're ready and have some kind of a proven track record, even if it may not be enterprise, it might be just here and there based on what you could get done with receptive folks, then you're going to be in good stead to make a big splash. when the time is right.
I'm going to add to, this is Troy speaking, I'm going to add to your answer there, Wayne. What I notice too, when sometimes you give people too much freedom, they get distracted from doing their job. At the end of the day, people need to get back to work and back to business. And sometimes I've seen people where they're spending a good part of the day just playing around with the data. They're not really making a difference. So sometimes you want to limit it in a way to get people focused back on what they're supposed to be doing, what their job actually is. I know sometimes it can actually be fun. I've seen people where they turn BI into more of a hobby versus actually getting back to business. Then the other part is when you have too much freedom, you start getting IT getting upset because people are asking for more things. They don't feel they have control, and then you start getting a little bit of infighting at the same time. So I see that as a true partnership between business and IT. As I said, at the end of the day, BI is there to help people do better at their job, to help increase performance. It's not there just as something to play with. But it can be fun. As I said, there's a lot of products very interactive. It ends up being more fun than actually producing a business result. So I do see a bit of that.
Yeah, I'd hardly agree with that.
All right. Well, Wayne and Troy, thank you both very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to help attend and direct a very good discussion here at our webinar. With that being said, our time is up. We are past the hour, as a matter of fact. So let's go ahead and finish this off here. So next steps for anyone who joined and is interested in finding out more, if you are interested about Dundas BI self-service, you can always access our documentation, which is available online. You can also get in touch with your account executive in order to organize a specific discussion. And if you're new to Dundas BI, you're more than welcome to contact the team to get a live walkthrough of the platform, or simply try it out yourself using our live online or full-feature product download demo. Once again, thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great day.